Coming up in this episode, I'm going to share with you how I organise my Kindle and the mystery, thriller and suspense books that I plan to read.
You're listening to the Thriller Novel Nerd podcast, a virtual book club for readers of mystery, thriller and suspense novels. Twice a month, I will bring you a short discussion about what makes a great thriller, as well as latest reads over a cup of tea. And who am I? I'm your host, thriller author Amelia D. Hay.
Hello book lovers. As suggested by the title, I'm going to dive into the depths of my Kindle app and share with you the books that are lurking and waiting to be read by me. Don't worry, I've managed to narrow this list down to 12 books. While I'm talking about my Kindle app, I'll also get a bit nerdy and discuss my organisational habits with you. I also plan to do an episode focused on what's in my Audible library, but I won't share that next. Why? Because I realise there will be several shows in a row focused on my reading habits, and I want to start talking about books because this podcast is supposed to be a virtual book club. But first, I want to discuss my reading goal for 2020. This year, I plan to read 26 books. Yes, that's significantly less than the 40 book goal from the previous year. I will increase this within the next 30 days, depending on how many books I've managed to read during this month. Now that I've shared that, I want to point out that I will not decrease the number of books I plan to read because that feels like cheating a little bit. Last year, I failed to reach my reading goal, and I would like to avoid that in the future. For those of you who are interested, I only managed to read 32 books. So I've set a conservative goal with the intention of increasing it in the first few months of the year. I have a tight publishing schedule this year, and I want to make sure the other goals around this are realistic. But that's enough about my author life. Without further ado, let's get into my Kindle app. Within my Kindle, I organise my books according to categories. Some of the categories are quite obvious and make sense, whereas some will not. So before I get into explaining why I do this, I'm just going to run through the list of categories. But don't worry, I'm not actually going to explain what's in each of these categories because this will just take 12 years. So the first collection is to be read. Then I have currently reading, read, my fiction books. In here features my short story The Lawn and Missing. And then I have a collection on writing craft and another on screenwriting. In this episode, I'll be focusing on the books sitting in my currently reading collection and not my TBR collection. Why, you ask? It all comes down to numbers. There are 15 books in my currently reading collection and 94 in my TBR collection, but I'll be only talking about 12 of those books because those ones relate to the crime, mystery, thriller and suspense genres. At present, I'm reading several books at once. And I don't recommend this because you make slow progress. I'm reading a few books for different reasons. Some are publishing related, which I will not share here. One of the books I'm reading is a collection of short stories. Again, this is publishing related because I want to see how other writers end their short stories, while others are just because I'm addicted to the series. So these first 3 books in this little section are the books that I'm currently reading for the reasons I explained in the previous section of the podcast. So I hope that makes sense and I'm not sort of adding any more confusion. The first one is Don't Tell Meg by Paul Teague. This is a psychological thriller and I'm at the 10% mark of the story. I'm just about to hit the inciting incident of that story or the moment where the character's life sort of falls apart. And quite interestingly, because this is a psychological thriller, it's actually written in the first person and in past tense. So I know based on what the protagonist is telling me or the main character is telling me that these events are happening or have happened. So it's happened in the past and he's retelling it. In essence, I sort of know he's about to screw up. Like he's about to really screw up his life. He's about to make a decision that he's looked back on and said, yeah, this is quite a stupid decision that I've made. And I'm watching him, well, I'm reading and I know he's about to do something. And it's in a way, it's added a layer of suspense that was quite over and above the layer of suspense that you'd expect for a psychological thriller. It's quite an interesting read. I don't usually read stories written in the first person. Usually they're written in third person, but this book it's a little different, not in a bad way. So this book really does keep me on the edge of my seat. And I've had to put this book down to give myself a breather because I was getting really worked up about it. I was almost getting really upset. Not upset, what's the word I'm searching for? I was getting a little, maybe anxious. This is the right word to describe how I was feeling as I was reading this book. I was getting anxious about the characters' decisions, and I thought, I'm taking this far too seriously. So I took a break, and I have every intention of coming back to it because I want to talk about this book on the podcast, maybe interview the author. I have every intention of coming back and reading that book. The second book on that list is the Coelho Medallion, probably completely screwed that up, by Kevin Tumlinson, and it's an archaeological thriller. This particular book is actually a reread. This is the second time I've read this book. Why can't I talk today? I'm really struggling. In my defense, it's 8:44, so maybe I can't talk while I'm hungry. That's so sad. The reason why I want to reread this is I want to write an archaeological thriller. So I'm reading this, and as I'm going along with each chapter, I'm making notes based on what is happening in the scene with every intention of looking back and analysing it and looking at what readers expect from an archaeological thriller. I don't plan on just doing this with this particular book, but a few books. So I aim to do this with about 5 books. So I'm at the 20% mark of the story, and I'm currently listening to it via audiobook and making notes. Yes, I'm listening to it. I've got the ebook and the audio. So I switched between the ebook and the audio. So the last book in this section is The Titanic Secret by Clive Cussler and Jack Dubreuil. So this book is in the Isaac Bell series. I don't actually know which number of book this is in that series, but I know it is in that series. This particular book starts off in the present day with something being discovered, and they mention a diary. So this is an action thriller. I'm not halfway through. I'm almost finished. I'm 92% of the way through the story. And quite interestingly, with an action thriller, you tend to go on they take you along to multiple destinations. So this particular book has taken me from Central City to Denver to the Paris metro tunnels where the train travels underground in the Paris metro. So I found that quite fascinating. In regards to the beginning of the book where I mentioned that was in present day, everything after the discovery of, the underwater discovery, and where they sort of talk about the diary they have discovered, all the locations after that point are actually set in 1912. And I'm reading this via my favourite way of reading, which is Kindle Whisper Sync for Voice, where you purchase the Kindle book and then you get the audiobook for an added extra price. I really love reading that way. If you've listened to the previous 3 podcast episodes, and you already know that. So all the books in this archaeological thriller category have been previously mentioned in the What's on My TBR episode. So I won't go into too much detail here. For those of you who are interested, I'll add a link to that episode, which is episode 3, in the show notes in your favourite podcasting app. So the first book in this category is The Spear of Atlantis by Andy McDermott, and it is book 14 in the Wild Chase series. Just like the previous book, I plan on reading this using Kindle Whisper Sync for Voice. So I have the ebook and the audio book for this one. Book 2, I'm actually super excited to read this, is The Midas Legacy by Andy McDermott, and that is book 12 in the Wild Chase series. And once again, I'm going to read this using Kindle Whisper Sync for Voice. And the final book in this category is The Lost Library by A.M. Dean, and this book is about the Library of Alexandria. And this book is definitely a part of the series, so I'm really interested in getting into this series. And just like all the other books in this category, I will read this using Kindle Whisper Sync for Voice. So this next category of books are books within the mystery genre, and I've cut up the mystery genre into 2 genres because I've noticed I had a huge collection, or I had a substantial collection of cozy mysteries. I decided to give it its own category within this podcast episode. So these books are just straight mysteries. They're not in any way cozy, so they probably have a bit of violence, a bit of blood and gore as well. I thought I'd mention that just in case there are people who don't like that particular thing, and that's totally fine if that doesn't float your boat. But the first one is Death on the River by Claire Chase, and I'll be reading this via Kindle Whispering for Voice. I have a funny feeling this book is a part of a series, but purely because I've seen other books with very similar covers, and I know it's a part of a series, but as I'm recording this episode, I'm recording it in audio and video. I've noticed in the video notes that I've got, because I use a teleprompter to help me, to remind me what I'm supposed to talk about, I didn't actually put this detail in like all of the others. A bit of a fail on my part, sorry. I will add a little bit more detail about this book in the show notes. I have a huge blog post that goes with these episodes over on my website, so if you want it like a transcript, or you just want more detail about the books, they will be there along with links. The second book is The Vicarage Murder by Faith Martin, and it is the first book in the Monica Noble detective series. So Monica Noble is an amateur detective who happens to be the vicar's wife. It's set in an idyllic English village. I will add, even though this kind of gives off the impression it might be a cozy mystery, it isn't actually a cozy mystery. So maybe it has a bit of blood and gore. Maybe she discovers a body. I have no idea. Well, obviously there's a body to be discovered because the title's a little bit spoilery. That's what you expect of books in this genre. So I'm guessing there's a bit of violence. I haven't actually read this. If you like cozy mysteries, you're probably not going to be into this one. I have no idea. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But I will do a wrap-up episode eventually where I talk about the books that I have read, and when I get around to reading this book, I will talk about what genre it is actually in and whether it's cozy or not. So book 3 on that list is The Flower Show Murder by Faith Martin, and it is book 2 in the Monica Noble detective series. It's funny that she's called it Monica Noble Detective because she's not quite a detective, she's an amateur detective, so I wonder if she eventually creates her own PI agency or something. That could be really interesting. Like if you imagine a vicar's wife with a PI agency, that's quite funny. So I'm actually quite excited to read those books. I added them in because I thought, ooh, a vicar's wife as a detective, and I'd never quite seen that before. And I do plan on sort of talking about books that have different types of amateur detectives, you know, those everyday people solving crimes, because I find those books really interesting, more so than, you know, the books with police, detectives, ex-military, CIA, FBI agents. I find those really stereotypical. It's great if you like that. So I will talk about those books that are more, I guess, under vigilante justice, like Jack Reacher and stuff like that, because I do like them. I don't mind me a bit of Jack Reacher, obviously. If you're looking at the video and you can see the bookshelf behind me, you know I like Jack Reacher because there's a whole pile of Lee Child books in my red shelf. I should do a library tour on my bookshelf. Not library tour. It looks like I live in a library. But I should do a bookshelf tour over on my YouTube channel because it won't make much sense on the podcast. So the books in this category are books that I want to read that are in the cozy mystery subgenre. So the first one is Murder at the Wedding by M.A. Comley, and it is book 1 in the Carmel Cove Cozy Mystery series. And I actually want to read this book in Kindle Whispering for Voice. What does annoy me is when I find books that I really want to read and they're only available in Kindle, and I'm just like, no, because I really like audiobooks. I guess I'm embracing my inner child and I just love to be read to. That's a bit sad, but I'd like to read as I'm doing those boring, mundane tasks like business administration. Like I listen to an audiobook as I empty the dishwasher, wash the dishes that can't be put in the dishwasher. That's annoying too. While I'm balancing the cash flow for my business, while I'm uploading my new book to KDP, because that takes a while because you've got to preview it before you hit publish, because you want to make sure that it's all looking good and you don't have to go back to the cover designer and say, there's a problem. Those tasks take a long time, and what's great for me to do during those times is to be doing something else like listening to a book. So yes, I find it quite frustrating when there's no audiobook available. I know audio is really expensive, but it's expensive to create. It's not expensive to purchase if you use Audible. But that book, The Murder at the Wedding, it actually features a private investigator, Ruth Morgan. The cover on this book looks amazing. If you're interested in looking at the covers, I'll add the covers to the blog post and they'll appear on the screen on the YouTube video. Oh, and the other thing about this book is I got the audio, the extra audio for £3.47. It was like £3.47. It was such a weird price, and I think if it was any higher than £4.99, I wouldn't have bothered buying it on its own. I would have used one of my Audible credits for it, but I didn't. The second book is called Gore in the Garden. It's a collection of cozy mystery short stories by Shelley Dawn Siddall. I butchered her last name. I really wish I put her last name and another author's last name in Google Translate just so I could practice it, but I was super lazy. So I found this book after an author mentioned her publishing journey or the publishing successes that she's had so far with this collection of short stories over in a Facebook group that's purely just for authors. Yeah, so I clicked on the book and I saw the cover and I was like, oh, this looks great. And another reason why I want to read this collection of short stories is, again, I want to write short stories and I want to see how other people do it and sort of compare, maybe learn a few things and hopefully improve my own writing style. I'm not gonna lie, I really like cozy mysteries. I got into the mystery genre after watching the Miss Marple series. I know Miss Marple isn't cozy. Agatha Christie is definitely hard mysteries. She's not cozy. It's not at all. There's no light humour in it at all. So this little category, I had to have this book on its own because it didn't fit in with any of the other categories I had in this podcast episode. So this book is essentially a thriller. It's like a vigilante justice style thriller, and it is Too Much Time by Lee Child, and it's a Jack Reacher short story. Part of the reason why I wanted to read this is I wanted to read it as a teaser for the short story collections written by Lee Child, and the fact that Lee Child wrote a story. I know he's a classic. He likes to pants. When I say pants, I know it's a writing term. So what he does is he flips his computer open and starts writing. There's no sort of preparation gone into it, and it's because he's been writing for such a long time and he's so good at it. And I'm really interested to see how he writes a short story, and I'm interested in these little short stories aren't in the timeline of the main series. A lot of them are happening before the series start. It's interesting to see what Jack Reacher was like before he walked into the town in... Sorry, I want to double check what the first Jack Reacher book is called, because I've read that and I can't remember it, but I have it on my bookshelf, so I'll be back. The first book is called The Killing Floor. So a lot of these short stories happen before the events that occur in The Killing Floor. I didn't expect to like Lee Child. Not Lee Child, sorry. He's the author. Jack Reacher. I have to admit, I do love to hate him, but I guess it's not a secret now that I'm talking about it on my podcast, I do have a bit of love for Jack Reacher. Yes, so that's why I decided to add that one to my currently reading collection on my Kindle. So that concludes my first ever What's on My Kindle episode. I guess my question for you is, do you like to read on a Kindle device or Kindle app? If so, what's on it? And how do you organise your Kindle? While I'm asking lots of questions, do you have a reading goal for 2020? Let me know by sharing your thoughts in the comments section below or over on the blog post at author-adh.com/TNN-004. I'll add a link in the show notes in your favourite podcasting app or over on YouTube. Or if you're this way inclined, I've set up a Facebook group for this podcast, so come on over and join in on the discussion after the show. The Facebook group is called Thriller Novel Nerd Book Club. I started the Facebook group because I thought it would be easier to create discussion on Facebook than under a blog post. For the sake of transparency, the Facebook group is so new that it's just me in the group at the moment. I know, super embarrassing, but I'm all alone. For some reason, I think of Home Alone when I say that. Do you know how he goes, and you're all alone? You can find a link to the Facebook group in the show notes in your favourite podcasting app and in the YouTube description box. If you love this video, then give it a thumbs up, and if you're new to this channel and want to be notified about more videos just like this, then hit the subscribe icon and hit the bell icon to be notified about more notifications. Yes, you got to click and hit so many things these days. It's starting to become super annoying, but that's what it is. And I'm showing my age. I've become grumpy. That's super embarrassing. Maybe I'll edit that out. And if you have any ideas on what you would like to see on the podcast, then feel free to share them in the comment section as well. Thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you in the next Thriller Novel Nerd episode. Bye!
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Thriller Novel Nerd podcast. If you're new to this podcast or want to be notified about more episodes just like this, then click the subscribe button right now. I'm your host, Amelia D. Hay, and I'll see you in 2 weeks' time for another episode. Happy reading, everybody!